Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Get comfortable and relax. Story 1. The Masked Trail. Almost a year to the day of me writing this, I experienced one of the worst and most traumatic moments of my entire life. Even now, when I try to piece it together in my mind, there are fragments that still don't quite make sense, moments that feel too eerie, too surreal to have been real, but they were. Please bear with me as I tell this story. I've never been much of a writer, and I think this may be the first time I've sat down to write anything since I was in high school, yet what happened deserves to be told. Maybe getting it down in words will help me finally put it to rest. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. That's already unusual, I know. My best friend and I had decided to go on a hike. The weather was less than ideal, cold, rainy and overcast. But personally, I've always loved the rain. There's something comforting about the hush it lays over everything, how it makes the trees glisten, how it paints the world in soft shades of grey and gold when it mixes with the early autumn leaves. We figured a rainy Tuesday meant the trails would be empty. Everyone else would be at work or inside, avoiding the drizzle. And we were right. After a 40-minute drive, we pulled up to the trailhead and saw not a single car in the lot. The feeling was electric. The whole forest to ourselves. There's something undeniably magical about that. The vastness of the woods stretching out in every direction, silent and still, like you've stepped into a forgotten world. We grabbed our gear, zipped up our jackets, and started walking. It wasn't long before something strange caught my friend's eye. I hadn't noticed it at first, but he stopped in his tracks, peering through the trees. He pointed roughly 20 feet off the trail and said, "Tell me that doesn't look like a person." I squinted. At first it was just shadows and branches, but then I saw it. A pale face, or something that looked like one, staring directly at us from between the trees. We cautiously approached, curiosity overtaking our initial hesitation. As we got closer, the mystery resolved itself. It wasn't a person at all, but a mask. A cheap white plastic mask nailed to the side of a tree. It was hidden just enough that we never would have seen it if my friend hadn't been looking in exactly the right place. It blended in perfectly with the bark, the moss, and the sparse leaves clinging to the branches. It was bizarre. Why would someone nail a mask to a tree in the middle of the woods? We walked over for a closer look. My friend, ever the bold one, pulled it down. Inside the mask was a piece of paper, a note. It read, 1. Go behind this tree and continue walking until you find 2. At first, we both laughed. It had to be part of a Halloween event or a scavenger hunt, but then again, the park was completely empty. The trail wasn't a family-orientated one, and this wasn't even along the marked path. My friend pointed that out. No park would encourage kids to go this far off trail. I told him we should just keep hiking and forget about it. The rain was starting to come down harder and it was getting colder, but he was already intrigued. Without waiting, he started walking in the direction the note had indicated, deeper into the forest. About 50 or 60 feet later, we found another mask, this one half buried in the wet leaves and dirt. He picked it up. Another note inside. 2. You're getting closer. Don't stop now. It was odd, to say the least, but somehow compelling. That was the beginning of a pattern that repeated 3 more times. With each mask, the notes got vaguer, more cryptic, and when we reached the 5th one, it simply read, "See you soon." That chilled us. Something about those 3 words, not as part of a game, not part of a riddle, but a direct statement, gave me a heavy feeling in my chest. I laughed it off, awkwardly, but something in the back of my mind was whispering that we weren't alone out there. The rest of the hike passed uneventfully, or so we thought. A few hours later, we made our way back to the parking lot, and to our surprise, another car was parked next to ours. And I mean right next to it, uncomfortably close, so close that I had to shift my car forward just to let my friend open the door. We both commented on how weird it was, but again, we tried to rationalize it. Probably just someone else out enjoying the trail, even in the rain. We talked about the masks during the drive home. It seemed more like a prank than anything else. Maybe some bored teenagers trying to freak out hikers, maybe an artist doing a weird installation. That's what we told ourselves. I dropped him off and headed home. It was late when I settled in for the night. The rain was still pattering softly against the windows. I turned off the TV after the game, brushed my teeth, and was about to go to bed when I thought I heard something outside. Ordinarily, I wouldn't have looked, but for some reason, maybe curiosity, maybe that lingering unease from the forest, I went to the window, and what I saw will haunt me forever. 5 figures, standing completely still on my front lawn, wearing masks. The same masks from the hike. My heart dropped. I ran upstairs, phone shaking in my hand, and called the police. I kept watch from my bedroom window, terrified to look away. They didn't move for a while. Then they started dancing, or at least moving in a strange, jerking rhythm. Every so often, one would run up to my front door, ring the bell repeatedly, and sprint back to the yard. Then they'd resume their eerie movements. It was almost like they were celebrating before me. I told myself it was a prank, a sick joke, but it had gone too far. The last few minutes before the police arrived were the worst. They started slamming against my front door, not just knocking, full body slams. The force of it shook the floor under my feet. My room was directly above the door, and I could feel the vibrations with every impact. And then, finally, blessedly, I saw flashing lights approaching, police cars. The figures scattered instantly. 2 officers chased after them, but within a couple of minutes, they returned empty-handed. I gave my statement, but without any sign of forced entry or any damage done, there was little the police could do. They didn't catch anyone. I didn't have any video footage, just my terrified account. The next day, I bought a Ring camera. A year has passed, and they've never come back. And yet, there's not a single night I go to sleep without thinking about them. I tell myself it was a prank, that someone followed us from the trail, or perhaps we unknowingly stumbled into someone's private joke, but deep down, I know what I felt. That note, "See you soon," wasn't a part of a game. It was a promise, and every night I watch the feed from that camera before bed, just in case. Story 2, The Man in the Woods. As much as I love this time of year, the cool bite of the air, the rich colours of falling leaves, the warm scent of bonfires in the distance, there's one memory that always creeps back into my thoughts when the seasons change. A memory I wish I could forget. It's been years now, but every time autumn arrives and the air carries that familiar scent of change, I'm reminded of one of the most unsettling nights of my life, a night that started out with joy, adventure and laughter, and ended in silence, shadows, and the unsettling image of a man who didn't belong. Back in high school, nearly 10 years ago now, my school offered a weekend camping and hiking trip in the nearby mountains. It was one of those programs that aimed to get students into nature, teach them about survival, and give them a break from the pressures of school life. I was all in. I loved being outdoors, and any chance to spend time under the open sky was a chance I would gladly take. Plus, getting to skip classes on a Friday was a bonus no teenager could resist. I convinced several of my friends to sign up too, promising them it would be a weekend to remember. And it was, though not for the reasons we hoped. The group was a mix of about 15 students and 3 adult chaperones. We hiked a scenic, relatively easy trail for several miles before setting up camp near the base of a gentle slope covered in tall trees and scattered boulders. The air was crisp, the sky a soft shade of slate grey, and the leaves danced around us like confetti. There was laughter and campfire stories, marshmallows on sticks, and moments where we truly forgot the world we'd left behind for a few days. That first night, the teachers enforced a strict lights-out policy by 10 p.m. We shared our tents with our closest friends, and I remember being in one with 3 others, all of us playing Pokemon on our Nintendo DS systems, trying to be quiet, but failing miserably. We giggled and whispered and battled each other until a flashlight beam swept across the tent wall. Followed by a stern voice reminding us to turn everything off. We complied, though sleep was difficult for me. The sounds of the forest, so peaceful to some, always set my imagination ablaze. Every crack of a branch or gust of wind became something else in my mind. The next day we hiked again, and the fatigue from a sleepless night faded under the canopy of trees and the rhythm of our footsteps. Sometime during the afternoon, one of my friends suggested we sneak out of our tent that night. He pitched it like an adventure, a chance to be rebellious without doing anything really wrong. All we wanted was to play our games a little longer without being told to stop. It didn't seem like a big deal at the time. We agreed. That night we told everyone we were turning in early. In reality, we waited until the forest was still, and then slipped quietly out of the tent and into the night. We walked a short distance from the campsite, down a narrow trail until we found a cluster of fallen branches and rocks to sit on. We huddled close, our screens glowing in the dark, the occasional quiet laughter rising from our huddle. The night was cold, and our breath formed clouds in the air. It felt exciting, secret, harmless. Then we heard it, a rustling in the trees. Not the gentle sway of wind, but the deliberate crunch of movement. We froze. I remember how all the joy drained from the moment. At first, we thought maybe a teacher had caught on to us, and we braced for a lecture. But as we looked toward the sound, a figure stepped out from the woods. A man, alone. He didn't say a word. He didn't even acknowledge us. He simply walked slowly into the clearing where we were sitting and lowered himself onto a log nearby, joining our circle like he belonged there, like he was part of our group. He looked to be in his 40s, with dark hair slicked back and clothes that were oddly formal for the woods. A button-down shirt and slacks, dirtied and worn but unmistakably once nice. He sat with his head down, hands resting on his knees, and he didn't speak. He didn't move. He didn't look up. None of us said anything. We were paralyzed by the absurdity and unease of it. A stranger had walked out of the forest and joined our circle without a word. It was like a scene from a dream or a nightmare. Something you know shouldn't be happening, but it is, and you can't understand why. I remember how we all looked at one another, eyes wide, silently asking the same question: what do we do? After what felt like forever, one of my friends started to slowly stand up. We'd agreed with nothing more than glances that it was time to go. One by one we all rose, intending to slip away, to return to the safety of our tents and pretend this never happened. But the man stood too. He didn't move toward us. He didn't speak. He just stood, mirroring our actions, his head still lowered, his eyes obscured by shadows. That was the moment we lost it. Something about the way he followed our lead, mimicked our movement without engaging. It set off every alarm in our minds. We ran as fast as we could. Our footsteps crashed through leaves and underbrush. We didn't care about being quiet anymore. I glanced back only once and saw him, jogging behind us at a slow, steady pace, not sprinting, not trying to catch up, just following, his face expressionless, no anger, no urgency, just silent pursuit. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. We reached the camp and dove into our tent, zipping it up like a thin sheet of nylon could protect us. None of us spoke. None of us dared wake the adults. We just sat there, wide-eyed, until the sky began to lighten with the first shades of dawn. We never saw him again. We hiked out of the woods that afternoon, and the experience became a whispered memory between us. We didn't tell the teachers. We didn't tell our parents. Looking back now, I'm still not sure why. Maybe we were afraid no one would believe us. Maybe we were afraid we'd be punished for sneaking out in the first place. Or maybe we were just too shaken to face the reality of it. I often wonder who that man was, what he was doing out there, why he joined our circle so silently, so calmly. Was he lost? Was he waiting? Was he watching us long before we saw him? There's something uniquely horrifying about an encounter that doesn't make sense. Something that doesn't follow the rules of normal interaction or human behavior. A man stepping from the woods and sitting among a group of kids without a word. and then following them with a blank face. There was no resolution, no explanation, just a presence in the dark, and then nothing. To this day, when autumn arrives and the trees turn gold and crimson, I remember that night, and though it's been years, I still find myself checking the edge of the woods whenever I'm near them, just in case, because I don't know who or what we met that night, and I'm not entirely sure we were supposed to walk away from it. Story 3. The Shack Beyond the Fence. Autumn had always been my favorite time of year, the kind of season that carries a blend of nostalgia and quiet beauty. The way the leaves turn fiery shades of amber and crimson, the way the air carries that crispness that makes you breathe a little deeper, and the way the world seems to slow down just enough for you to notice all its little details. I especially loved that early to mid-October stretch, when the trees still held on to their colours, and the weather felt like a soft whisper before the harshness of winter. My husband and I shared this love for the season. It wasn't just the apple cider or the pumpkin patches, it was everything. The long drives, the sound of leaves crunching beneath your boots, the soft golden glow in the late afternoon sun. That was our season. It meant warmth, togetherness, and peace. This story, however, isn't about peace. It isn't about the joy that autumn usually brings. It's about a day that tried to steal that joy away. A day that began as perfectly as any and slowly unraveled into something I still don't understand. Something that has haunted my husband in ways that I cannot fix, and something that changed our yearly ritual into a time of quiet dread. Because no matter how many years pass, he never forgets. And neither do I. It was the weekend after we celebrated our first wedding anniversary. We had gone all out for that one, spending the previous weekend in a cozy mountain cabin, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot cocoa and laughing like we were still dating. So the next weekend was meant to be a low-key day, just the two of us. We didn't want to do anything extravagant, just enjoy the season before the cold truly settled in. The morning had started off beautifully. A light mist curled around the trees, the sun peeking through in thin rays. The kind of morning that makes you want to stay outside forever. We decided to go pumpkin picking. There was this large farm an hour out of town, a place we'd visited a few times in the past. Not just your standard pumpkin patch either. This place had everything. Fresh donuts dusted with cinnamon sugar, steaming apple cider, hay rides, live music and vendors selling handmade crafts. It was cheerful, cozy and filled with the kind of small-town charm you see in movies. We spent hours there, laughing, wandering between rows of pumpkins, drinking coffee from paper cups, holding hands like newlyweds, still basking in the glow of forever. But when we were packing the car to head home, I could tell something was still tugging at my husband. He wasn't quite ready for the day to end. I asked him if there was anything else he wanted to do, thinking maybe he wanted to stop for more donuts or take a detour home. Instead, he smiled, that kind of mischievous grin that always meant he had an idea brewing, and suggested we go for a short hike. Now, if you know me, you'd know that hiking isn't exactly my favorite activity. I don't mind the outdoors in small doses, but the idea of wandering through woods filled with bugs, mud, and unpredictable weather isn't my version of a good time. But I also knew how much my husband loved it, how it recharged him. So when he suggested we check out one of the nearby trails, especially since we were already so far from home, I agreed, albeit reluctantly. We drove about 20 minutes from the pumpkin patch to a trail we'd visited once before. It was one of those hidden gems, not too popular, not too long. The kind of trail that winds gently through the woods and ends in a small overlook with a bench. As we pulled into the parking lot, I could see his excitement fade. The entrance was closed off with a large wooden sign that read, "Closed for renovations, see you next spring." The gate had a heavy chain link stretched across the entrance, with cones and a few faded no trespassing signs posted nearby. He sat in the car for a moment just staring. I assumed we'd turn around and head back, but instead, he parked the car and opened his door. "Let's just check it out," he said, gesturing to the other cars parked in the lot. "Look, we're not the only ones here." I hesitated. This wasn't like him. He wasn't the type to break rules or ignore signs. We'd both grown up respecting boundaries, following instructions, but something about that day had him acting differently. Maybe it was the fresh air or the high from the morning's perfect joy. Maybe he just didn't want the day to end on a flat note. I protested gently, but he nudged me with that same boyish smile, the one that usually got him out of trouble, and before I knew it, we were climbing over the chain fence and stepping onto the empty trail. We walked for about 10 minutes in silence. The forest was silent too. Too silent. No birds, no squirrels. Just the distant whisper of wind through branches. Then, a few steps off the trail, he stopped and pointed to a small structure nestled between the trees. It looked like a shed or a trailer of some sort, oddly new. Not at all like the abandoned cabins or ranger shacks you sometimes see on hikes. It was clean, well constructed, a portable building almost like a construction office, the kind you'd see at a highway work site. "Want to check it out?" he asked. I didn't. Every instinct in my body told me to keep walking, to turn around, to get out of there. But he was already walking toward it, curiosity clearly piqued. So I followed, heart thudding softly, trying not to let it show. As we neared the building, I noticed something that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Voices. Muffled, angry voices coming from inside. My husband stopped too. We both crouched down instinctively, staying low against the outer wall. His expression shifted. Playful curiosity drained from his face, replaced with something harder. Focused. He was taller than me, so he crept toward the window and pressed his ear against the side of it. I stayed near the corner, too short to see inside, but close enough to feel the tension building. He didn't say anything for several seconds. Then he cupped his hands to peer through the glass. And what I saw next, or rather what I saw on his face, is what I'll never forget. I have never, in all the years I'd known him, seen that kind of expression. He went pale, absolutely ghost white, his eyes widened, jaw clenched. Then he dropped low, practically ducking beneath the window, and moved with urgency I'd never seen before. "We need to go," he whispered, voice shaking. He didn't give me time to ask questions. He grabbed my hand and we bolted. Back down the trail, through the empty woods, over the fence and into the car. The entire drive home he kept checking the rearview mirror, eyes darting like he was expecting to be followed. When we got back to the house, he didn't come inside. Instead, he went back out and sat in the car, phone pressed to his ear. I watched through the kitchen window, my mind racing, my body trembling with confusion and fear. He called the police. I don't know what he told them. He made sure I couldn't hear, but I saw the way his hands shook as he spoke. That night, I tried to ask him what he saw, just once, and the look he gave me, that haunted, hollow stare, it broke something in me. He didn't shout. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Please don't ask me. Just don't." I never asked again. But the memory hasn't left either of us. Ever since that day, he hasn't been the same. He doesn't sleep through the night anymore. Every evening he lies beside me until I fall asleep, and then he gets up. He doesn't watch TV, doesn't read, doesn't play games. He just sits in the living room in silence, facing the door, as though keeping watch. Sometimes he dozes off on the couch just before sunrise, but never for long. He tells people it's work stress, that he's an insomniac. But I know better. I've tried to piece it together over the years, what he might have seen, what was inside that portable building, who was inside. But I've never gotten an answer. I've respected his silence, even as I lay awake some nights, replaying that day in my mind. Because the truth is, something happened out there. Something changed in him. And though I'll never know exactly what he saw through that window, I do know one thing. It terrified him. Not startled, not spooked, terrified. And whatever it was, I don't think it was meant to be seen. Story 4, The Woman in White. There are places in the woods that feel untouched, like they belong to something older than memory. where time doesn't quite behave the way it should. My wife and I love hiking in the fall, and over the years we've wandered through dozens of trails across the northeast. The air during October always carries a certain crispness, a kind of secret, like the forest is whispering stories it's told 1,000 times before. And usually those stories are good ones, filled with laughter, aching muscles, and breathtaking overlooks. But there was one hike, years ago, that didn't feel like a story at all. It felt like something we weren't supposed to see, something that left a silence between us that neither of us could ever feel again. It happened in the middle of October. The leaves were just past their peak, a tapestry of dying fire across the treetops. We'd already hiked most of the marked trails within a few hours' drive, so we started venturing further out, looking for more remote spots. That weekend, we decided to try something a little riskier, an unmarked trail I'd heard about from a friend. He described it as wild, rugged, and stunning, and while we weren't exactly survivalists, we were experienced enough to manage without markers. My wife, especially, had a natural sense of direction. She could find her way back even without a map. So we packed up, drove about 2 hours out, and found the rough path that led off the main road and into the wilderness. There were no signs, no gravel parking lot, not even a fence or gate, just a narrow dirt path cutting into the trees. It felt like we were stepping into a painting. As we walked, the sun trickled through the leaves in golden threads. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, and the only sound was the crunch of our boots on the forest floor. We walked for hours, stopping occasionally to take pictures or sip water. Around midday we reached a clearing, an almost perfectly circular patch of forest ringed by tall trees. It felt designed somehow, like nature had carved out this space for us. There were 2 old tree stumps right in the center, as if waiting for us to sit. We took the invitation. It was peaceful there. We shared a snack, talked about how beautiful everything was, and debated whether to keep going or turn back. We weren't lost, but the forest was getting denser, and the shadows had started to stretch longer than they should have. That's when we heard the noise, a soft rustling just beyond the trees. It wasn't wind. It wasn't a squirrel. It was deliberate. Something or someone was moving out there. We both went quiet, our ears straining. There was no rhythm to the sound, no natural cadence, just the occasional snap of a twig, a shuffle of leaves. We waited, listening, trying to make sense of what we were hearing. It didn't stop. My wife stood first. She said she wanted to check it out, and truthfully, I was curious too. Cautiously, we moved toward the sound, parting branches and stepping over roots until we emerged into another small clearing. And that's when we saw her. She was pacing. A young woman, no more than her mid-20s, with long blonde hair and bare feet, walking in jerky little circles. She wore a white dress that hung just past her knees, the kind you might wear to a summer wedding. Only this one was dirty, stained with earth. Her arms flailed occasionally as she moved, her hands twitching. She muttered to herself, too softly to understand. But there were bursts of laughter too, high-pitched, hollow, disconnect. We stopped dead in our tracks. There was something wrong about her. Not just her behavior, but her presence. She didn't seem aware of us at all, like she was lost in her own world, sealed off from reality. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but my instincts told me to stay back. My wife, braver than me, called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" At first there was no reaction. The woman just kept pacing, but then she stopped, froze. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her muttering ceased. Slowly, she turned to face us, and then she hissed. Not a scream, not a shout, a hiss, like a cat cornered in a fight. Her eyes met ours, but they didn't register us as people. They were wild, wide, unblinking. She bared her teeth, then turned and bolted into the woods with inhuman speed. Barefoot, silent, gone. My wife chased after her, shouting that we couldn't just leave her out there. I stayed behind, rooted by the sheer strangeness of it all. She ran after the girl for a few minutes, calling out, trying to follow the sound of snapping branches. but within moments, the forest swallowed her completely. She didn't slow down, didn't stumble. It was like she knew every inch of the terrain. Eventually my wife came back, panting and pale. "She's gone," she said. We made our way back to the first clearing in silence. There was an eerie stillness in the forest now, as if it was holding its breath, waiting. I suggested we go back to the car, but my wife insisted we report it to someone. She called the local park office from the car, explaining what we'd seen and where we'd seen it. They agreed to send someone out. We waited until a ranger arrived. He didn't believe us. "Oh," he nodded politely, took notes, asked questions, but there was something in his tone, a kind of patronizing smile that made it clear he thought we were either exaggerating or making it up entirely. He walked with us back to the spot, listened to our story again, then shrugged. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, almost dismissively. Could have just been someone messing around. But she hadn't been messing around. We knew what we saw, the way she moved, the way she hissed, the look in her eyes. That wasn't a joke. That wasn't a prank. Over the next few days, we followed up. We called the station to ask if they'd found anything. They hadn't. No reports of a missing person, no signs of anyone having been in that area. They checked the recent missing persons reports in the state. Nothing matched. No blonde women in white dresses, no barefoot hikers, nothing. She didn't exist, not officially. But we'd seen her. My wife became obsessed for a while. She went back to those woods, retracing our path, searching for any sign of her. She found nothing. Not a footprint, not a thread of fabric, not even disturbed leaves. It was as if she'd never been there. And maybe that's the part that haunts me most. Because I still can't decide what's more terrifying, that she was real and we couldn't help her, or that she wasn't. Some nights I'll wake up from dreams where I'm back in that clearing. Only this time she doesn't run. She walks toward me, her eyes locked on mine, her hiss turning into words I can't quite understand. I see the dirt on her legs, the way her feet barely touch the ground. And I feel this overwhelming sense that I wasn't supposed to see her, that none of us were. I don't know who she was, or what she was, but I've learned that the woods have stories older than us, stories that don't end neatly. Sometimes they just vanish, like footsteps in the leaves. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, those stories stare back at you. Story 5, The Forgotten Church. Every year, when the leaves begin to blush into oranges and golds and the smell of pine and dry bark starts to drift through the crisp autumn air, I think about that cabin trip in the Adirondacks, not because of the usual beauty or the peacefulness that region is known for, but because of what we found there and what I still can't explain. It was the kind of thing you laugh about at first, something you think will become a fun memory, a cool story to tell around a fire, but it didn't end that way. The deeper we went, the more surreal it became. What started out as a detour on a long-planned hiking trip turned into a bizarre and eerie experience. And now, years later, we still talk about it with hushed voices, as if saying too much might invite something back. It began the way all our fall hiking trips did. Every October, my friends and I would leave our homes in Nevada and fly across the country to New York. Not the city. We weren't interested in concrete or skyscrapers. We were after the forests, the mountains, the trails that wrapped around lakes like ribbons. The Adirondacks had become our favorite spot. There was something pure about the wilderness there, vast, quiet, with trails that could lead you into entire days of solitude if you weren't careful. And that's what we liked. That feeling of being disconnected, of vanishing from the modern world for a little while. Our friend Louise was always the one who handled the planning. He was a natural in the woods, the kind of person who could survive off tree bark and river water if he had to. Over the years, he had guided us through rough terrain, heavy rain and near-frozen mornings, always with a quiet confidence that reassured the rest of us. When Louise picked a trail, we didn't question it. That year, he promised something more relaxed, a scenic route, nothing too physically demanding. We were getting older and a few of us had jobs that tied us to a desk far more often than we liked. We were looking forward to a peaceful weekend, a gentle hike, some photography and long nights in a cabin playing cards and cooking over a campfire. It sounded perfect. We started out early on the second morning of our trip, hiking a path Luis had mapped out the night before. The air was brisk and the light fog that clung to the forest floor slowly burned away as the sun filtered through the canopy. We moved at a comfortable pace, stopping often to admire the scenery or take photos. The forest was quiet in that meditative way only remote places can be. The farther we walked, the more the sounds of the world fell away. It was just us and the trees. About 2 hours in, Luis paused. He was squinting through a gap in the trees to the right of the trail. We followed his gaze and saw something up ahead, something that didn't belong. It was hard to make out through the thick brush, but the silhouette was unmistakable, a structure of some kind, tall, angular, and made of dark wood. At first, I thought it was just an old cabin or perhaps a hunting shack, but as we got closer, its shape became clearer. There was a steeple, a wooden cross. It was a church. We couldn't believe our eyes. Deep in the forest, far off any marked trail, stood a building that looked like it had been dropped straight out of a different century. The structure was aged, yes, but not collapsed or overtaken by nature the way you'd expect something abandoned to be. The roof sagged slightly. The paint had peeled, but the windows were intact, and the door, though weathered, stood closed and whole. Our curiosity overwhelmed any hesitation. We approached it like explorers stumbling on a lost world, phones out, snapping pictures. Luis pushed open the front door, which creaked in protest but gave way easily. The air inside was dry and musty, heavy with the scent of old wood and wax. Rows of wooden pews stretched down a narrow aisle, all facing a small altar at the far end of the room. Above it hung a wooden cross. Dozens of melted candles sat in thick clusters on the floor and ledges. Their wax had pooled and hardened into strange patterns over time. It was like stepping into a time capsule. A forgotten church in the middle of nowhere. We spent a while just walking around, whispering out of instinct as if the church was still sacred in some way. I remember feeling something I couldn't quite describe, not fear exactly, but a deep awareness of being somewhere that shouldn't have been there. There were no paths leading to it, no signs of recent activity, and yet it hadn't been consumed by the forest. It was preserved. Then Luis called out from behind the altar, "There's something here." We walked over and saw what he meant. 2 floorboards near the back were a different color, lighter. He tapped them with his boot, hollow. He moved the altar aside and sure enough we found hinges, a trapdoor. It was locked with an old latch, but Luis pried it open with the handle of his hiking knife. The door creaked upward, revealing a narrow hole. We shined our lights down and saw the ground about 8 feet below. It was a room, or more accurately a tunnel, narrow, rectangular, with stone walls and a dirt floor. Symbols were painted on the stone in red and black, symbols none of us recognized. I wish I could say we backed away then. I wish I could say we closed the hatch and left, said our prayers and walked calmly back to the cabin. But we didn't. We were 4 men in the middle of the woods, all caught up in the thrill of discovery. That mix of adrenaline and awe clouded our judgment. Luis jumped down first. He landed with a grunt, turned in a circle and motioned for us to follow. One by one, we descended into the underground room. The air was warmer down there, not just stale, warm, as if some unseen furnace were humming in the walls. The room was small, maybe 10 feet across, with the painted symbols wrapping around every surface. At the far end, half covered in dirt, was another hole. This one, in the wall, it had been sealed with nailed wooden boards, though a few had fallen or broken. A gap revealed a deeper darkness beyond. We took turns peering into the hole with our flashlights. The beams didn't reach far, just blackness and heat that rolled out in faint waves. Luis wanted to crawl inside. We talked him out of it. For the first time, someone, maybe it was me, said we should stop. We didn't know what this was, didn't know how stable the space was, or if it was even safe to breathe down there. We agreed to head back up. Before we left, I knelt and looked into that hole one more time. There was no sound, no movement, but I had the overwhelming feeling that something was watching me. Not malicious, just waiting. We climbed out, closed the hatch, put the altar back in place. Back at the cabin, we argued about what to do. Should we tell someone? Report it to the park rangers? Luis decided to mention it when we checked in the next morning. The ranger listened, nodding slowly, then told Luis the church was likely part of an old mining settlement that had been abandoned decades ago. He claimed the tunnel probably led to a collapsed mine. Dangerous, yes, but nothing sinister, just forgotten history. But that's not what it felt like. We looked into it afterward. There were no records of a church in that area. The mining town had been miles north, and even then, most buildings had been leveled by storms or demolished by the state. So how did that church remain? Why was it still intact? Why was there warmth in a tunnel sealed beneath it? Why was there a hole in the stone wall that swallowed light like it was never meant to be filled? We still don't know. None of us ever went back. We couldn't find the exact trail again. Luis swore it had changed. The landmarks we remembered weren't there. We chalked it up to time, to misremembering. But part of me wonders. Maybe we weren't supposed to find it in the first place. Maybe places like that only appear when they want to be seen. And maybe next time, the door in the wall won't be sealed. Story 6. The Man by the Creek. My favorite time of year has always been the stretch between mid-September and late October. Something about that golden sliver of autumn makes everything feel quieter, softer, almost dreamlike. I've lived in the same small town for over 17 years, tucked away in a region that booms with tourists during summer but falls silent once Labor Day passes. The streets empty, the beaches grow still, and the trails, those winding beautiful trails through the forest behind my house, become mine again. I work late nights from my computer, so I usually start each day with a long hike through those woods, accompanied by my dog, a fiercely loyal and loving shepherd lab mix named Bramble. Over the years, I've grown intimately familiar with every turn in those trails, every fallen tree, every little creek that carves its way through the land. I've even strayed into unmarked areas, not the smartest idea, I know, but the forest feels like a second home to me. It's always been a place of peace, of solitude, a world that keeps the noise of the outside world at bay. Until last week. That day started like any other. Cool air, sunlight breaking through the thinning canopy of leaves, and Bramble trotting a few feet ahead of me with her ears perked and tail swaying. We entered the woods through the same narrow path we always used, weaving down toward the water where the trail narrowed. The forest had that early morning hush, broken only by the soft trickle of the nearby creek and the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush. Nothing unusual, nothing strange, until Bramble stopped. She froze suddenly, ears flat, and let out a low growl that rose from deep in her chest. My dog is friendly, endlessly curious, a little too eager around people sometimes, but this was different. Her body was stiff, her tail dropped. She began to whimper slightly, shifting nervously from paw to paw. I tried to calm her down, kneeling beside her, brushing her fur gently, whispering reassurances. That's when I saw him. A man burst through the creek, not strolling, not hiking, but running, soaking his jeans and shoes in the cold, fast-moving water as he rushed across it like it was nothing. He didn't seem to notice me at first. He stopped on the opposite bank, his head scanning the woods, breathless and disheveled. I ducked behind a thick bush, pulling Bramble close and trying to quiet her down, but she kept growling low, her body pressing against mine protectively. And then, slowly, he turned. His eyes found me almost instantly, like he had known exactly where I'd be. For a moment he just stared, his mouth opened slightly. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'6", and not bulky either. His face was round, clean-shaven, but oddly expressionless. His dark eyes felt vacant, unfocused, yet somehow still aware. And then he spoke. "I see you," he said, in a low, almost sing-song voice. My blood turned to ice. I didn't respond. I stayed still, hoping, somehow, he'd assume he was mistaken and walk away. But he didn't. He took a step closer to the creek, then another, still staring, still smiling. "I see you," he said again, then again, then again. Each time his voice grew louder, not angrier, just louder, like a child taunting a sibling. My heart was pounding in my chest. Bramble let out a sharp bark and lunged slightly, held back only by my tight grip on her harness. I could feel my breathing start to quicken, my mind scrambling to decide if I should run, yell, or just stay still. And then he charged. He sprinted back through the creek, water splashing high around him, and headed straight toward us with an eerie determination. Bramble lost it, snarling and barking so fiercely that I nearly lost my grip on her. I stood up quickly and stepped into the path, trying to appear larger, puffing out my chest the way you're supposed to when you encounter a wild animal, and for reasons I still can't fully explain, it worked. He stopped, just like that, inches from me. He stopped dead in his tracks. His smile widened, and for the first time I saw his teeth, yellowed, crooked and stained. It wasn't a friendly grin. It was the kind of smile you see in your worst dreams, stretched too wide, too long, like it didn't belong on a human face. He leaned in close, and in the quietest voice, he screamed. Not a shout, not a yell, a scream, shrill, piercing, sudden. It ripped through the silence, echoed across the trees, sent birds scattering into the sky. It was so loud and abrupt that Bramble jumped back, almost yanking me off my feet. And then, without another word, the man turned and ran, splashing back through the creek and disappearing into the trees on the far side. Just like that. I didn't move for a long time. Bramble stood beside me, still tense, ears twitching. The forest was completely silent. Even the wind had gone still. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, and called the sheriff. He's a friend of mine, someone I've known for years. I gave him my location and told him everything I could remember. He told me to stay there and that he'd be out with 2 deputies in under 10 minutes. I kept Bramble close, scanning the trees, watching every shadow. When they arrived, I waved them down from the trail. The sheriff stepped out first, followed by the deputies. They moved slowly, carefully, not drawing weapons but clearly on alert. I pointed across the creek and described the man again. They began combing the area, moving in a wide arc, and within minutes, they found him. Or rather, he found them. He ran at the sheriff, seemingly out of nowhere, tackling him to the ground with startling force. The deputies rushed in, wrestling him down, shouting commands, pinning him to the dirt. He didn't fight back much. He screamed the entire time, but not words, just noise. Long, drawn-out shrieks, alternating with manic laughter that echoed into the forest and made the hair on my arms stand up. When they finally restrained him, they searched his pockets. No ID, nothing of note. Just a kitchen knife, the kind you pull from a drawer to chop vegetables. The blade was rusted, but it was sharp. He didn't speak. Not to the officers, not to me. Not a name, not a word. He just kept screaming. The sheriff looked shaken. He assured me they'd take him in and try to figure out who he was, whether he needed medical help or belonged to some facility. They called in someone from the state and took him away in the back of one of the cruisers. And just like that, he was gone too. I haven't heard much since. The sheriff told me he was transferred to a state-run mental health facility for observation. Apparently, he still hadn't identified himself. He didn't appear on any missing persons list. No one had reported him. He was just a man in the woods, alone, armed, laughing. And yet, I keep wondering where he came from. Everyone in this town knows everyone. Even the outsiders are known by someone. The seasonal workers, the quiet recluses, the old-timers who live out near the lake. But no one recognized him. No one has claimed him. He was a ghost. That day replays in my mind more often than I'd like to admit. The look on his face, the smile, the way he seemed to know where I was before I made a sound. That scream, raw, almost animal. The way he stopped just inches from me, like something about me made him pause, or maybe something behind me. I don't know, but I do know this. I haven't walked the trails alone since then. Bramble still barks every time we near the creek. She stops, just like before, and stares across the water as if she expects him to return. I don't push her anymore. We turn around, head home. There are other trails, other woods, but some places, once touched by something like that, never feel safe again. And when the leaves start to fall, when the mornings get colder, and the forest grows quiet once more, I wonder if he's still out there, and if, wherever he is, he still sees me. Story 7, The Finger from the Shed. Every October I carve out a few days to disappear into nature. It's become a tradition, a kind of personal reset button that lets me breathe away the stress of modern life. I don't plan extravagant vacations or fly off to faraway places. Instead, I keep things simple. I stay local, visit farms, hike quiet trails, and spend my nights watching old horror movies with pizza and cider. It's a routine I've come to cherish, a personal ritual that helps me manage my anxiety and reflect before the cold season sets in. It's usually a peaceful time, but 3 years ago, that tradition changed forever. That year, a friend of mine, let's call him Justin, recommended a trail about 45 minutes from where I lived. He knew I liked solitude when I hiked, so he suggested this spot with the clear warning that it wasn't a marked path. According to him, the trail was used frequently enough that the path was still visible, but it was unregulated, no signs, no trail maps, no ranger stations. He said he had hiked it himself and left a few small markers to help guide the way. He suggested I bring my own markers too, just in case. I was hesitant at first. I'd always stuck to official trails, even when I hiked alone. But he was insistent, and I trusted his judgment. He even gave me detailed directions, where to park, how to find the entrance, what landmarks to look for. So, on a cool October morning, I packed up my small day pack with water, snacks, and a handful of small flags with little red crosses on them, the same kind hikers often use to leave markers on unmaintained paths. I texted both my parents and my partner to let them know where I'd be hiking that day. Safety first. I always made sure someone knew my whereabouts, especially when hiking alone. When I arrived at the spot Justin described, I parked off the side of a quiet road. There were no other cars, which was expected. I stepped out and looked around, quickly finding what looked like the start of a narrow dirt path winding between two thick tree trunks. I double-checked the coordinates Justin gave me. They matched. I adjusted my pack, took a deep breath of crisp forest air, and headed in. At first, the hike was beautiful. The early light streamed in through the thinning canopy of leaves, and the air had that perfect autumn bite to it. I could hear birds overhead, squirrels darting through the underbrush, and the occasional creak of old branches shifting in the breeze. The path itself, though unmarked, was easy to follow. Dirt and leaves had been packed down by many previous hikers, and Justin was right. There were a few of his own markers tied around low-hanging branches. Every so often I stopped to place one of my own Red Cross flags near a notable feature, a crooked tree, a fallen log, a large moss-covered boulder, anything that might help me retrace my steps if I needed to. I wasn't worried though. The forest felt safe, familiar even. It reminded me of the woods behind my grandparents' house, wild but not threatening. I walked slowly, soaking in the colors, the sounds, the solitude. I didn't realize how much time had passed until I glanced at my phone. Over an hour had gone by. I hadn't made much distance. I'd been stopping often, lost in thought, admiring the scenery. I figured I'd walk just a bit further before finding a quiet spot to sit, have some water and turn back. Eventually I found the perfect clearing, a small hollow near a break in the trees where sunlight spilled onto a patch of soft moss and dry leaves. I sat down, drank some water, and pulled out a granola bar. It was peaceful, serene, almost too quiet. That's when I noticed it. The silence. Not just the absence of human noise, but the complete stillness of the forest itself. No birds, no rustling leaves, no wind. Just an eerie, oppressive quiet. At first I thought maybe it was just my ears adjusting, but then I made a small noise, a cough, just to break the stillness, and suddenly all the background sounds returned. Birds resumed chirping, leaves rustled gently. The breeze came back. It was strange, subtle but strange. I shook it off and decided it was time to head back. I stood, brushed the dirt from my pants, and started retracing my steps. At first, everything was fine. I recognized the landmarks I'd flagged and the forest seemed familiar. But about halfway back, I started noticing something that didn't sit right. My markers had moved. One that I'd clearly placed on a branch was now tied to a nearby tree trunk. Another was lying on the ground, trampled and dirty. A third was positioned right in the middle of the path, something I never would have done. At first, I thought maybe the wind had blown them, or maybe I'd simply misremembered. But the more I walked, the more unsettling the changes became. Some markers had disappeared entirely. Others were duplicated, 2 flags tied side by side on branches I didn't recognize. The path began to feel foreign, unfamiliar, like I had entered a slightly altered version of the same trail. That's when I noticed it. A shed. At first I thought it was just another rock, a large moss-covered mound. But as I approached, I realized it had straight edges, wooden planks, a door. It was a structure, small, old, mostly covered in vegetation, but unmistakably man-made. I stopped, staring at it. It didn't make sense. Justin hadn't mentioned anything like this. There were no buildings out here, at least there weren't supposed to be. And then I saw the door creak open, just slightly, a slow, deliberate movement, and out of the darkness inside, a pale hand extended. It didn't reach, it didn't wave, it simply pointed. One bony, pale finger, curling toward me, beckoning. I couldn't breathe. My legs locked, my heart pounded in my ears. I stared at the finger, unmoving, as if my brain hadn't fully processed what I was seeing. It was thin, almost skeletal. The nail was long and yellowed. The skin was a strange shade of greyish-white. It didn't move again. It just held the gesture, unwavering, inviting me in. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't try to understand what I had just seen. My only thought was getting back to my car. My feet pounded the forest floor. Branches whipped against my arms and legs, and Bramble's Red Cross flags blurred past me, scattered and twisted in the wrong places. I pulled out my phone, breathless, and tapped the unlock button. I pressed and held the button linked to my car's alarm. A few seconds later, I heard it, faintly, far off, but real, the distant honk of my car's alarm echoing through the trees. I ran toward the sound, following it like a lifeline. The sound grew louder, clearer, the trees thinned, and finally I saw the road. I reached the car, yanked the door open, slammed it shut behind me, and locked every door. My hands were shaking so badly that it took 3 tries to start the engine. When the car finally roared to life, I peeled out of the gravel and didn't look back one. I didn't stop driving until I reached the first rest stop on the highway. I parked, killed the engine, and just sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. My mind raced through possibilities, a squatter, a prankster, a trick of the light, but none of them explained that hand, that finger, that shed in the middle of the woods where no building should have stood. I considered the stress, the silence, the weird marker movements. Maybe I was dehydrated, maybe my anxiety played a trick on me, maybe... But deep down, I know what I saw. I haven't hiked alone since. I only hike on marked trails now. I stay where people are, where maps exist, where buildings don't appear out of nowhere. I've never gone back to that spot. I never even asked Justin about it, and strangely enough, he never asked how the hike went. Maybe he already knew what was out there, or maybe he didn't. Either way, whatever it was, whoever extended that finger from the darkness, I don't think they wanted me lost. I think they wanted me found.